Okay, so I think we're recording. I just want to welcome everyone online and in the room to our session on coping with failure and rejection within academia. Our colleague Benjamin Sovacool is here. I'm going to introduce him. He's the Professor of Energy Policy and Professor of Earth and Environment at Boston University. Thank you for talking to us, Ben.
You're very welcome, Helen, and greetings, everybody. So what an interesting talk that probably would have gotten someone fired 20 or 30 years ago, because this topic was especially taboo. And I also never had any talk like this when I was going to grad school. And I would have really benefited from it because none of us really likes failure. And yet, as we know, within academia, how do I advance the slides?
Just press down.
Down. Down. We have no shortage of different ways that you can fail in academia. Success rates for papers, grant proposals, op-eds, letters of promotion, etc., also range greatly to the elite ones having a less than 1% success rate. And the average rejection rate in many journals, especially Nature and Science, is above 99%, even at the desk stage. Many excellent and fundable papers, by definition, are rejected every day. Yet, it hurts. I will confess that in my first rejection as a grad student, I cried. I didn't even cry at my grandmother's funeral. Yet somehow that rejection really, really frustrated me and found it, it was really hard to recover from. And there are still grant proposals that I really, really wanted to have funded that still hurt 20 years later. I still remember where I was the moment that it got rejected and how shocked and disappointed I was and so forth. But before I think I get into all the ways in which we can get rejected, I did want to just give you a little bit more background about me. I know some of you know who I am, but many of you do not. I do identify as a he, him. That's why I said guy. You'll see a lot of examples today in my own area of expertise, which is energy and climate justice and policy, and science technology studies, which are relevant for sociology and global studies and law and politics, but not identical. I have written or edited or co-edited or co-authored 22 books. So I also have a lot of experience there with some of the best presses in the world, including a really neat book with Nature Climate Change. They don't often do books, but did it one time for one of our books, as well as some of the presses here, which are very, very prestigious and hard to publish in. I've authored lots of articles. More importantly, as of last week, 170 have been written with students, often as lead authors. And 3 books ended up being written with students or postdocs. Not only am I an author, I'm also an editor. And so I created this really nice journal that I still love called Energy Research and Social Science. It's now 10 years old. It's doing very well. I've processed 11,000 manuscripts as of this morning. And then I also am on the editorial board of Nature, Energy and Climate Change, Global Environmental Change, et cetera, which is really neat because I get to see reviews and I also get to arbitrate between reviewers and authors. And then lastly, I also am a peer reviewer for lots of presses. And so if you're submitting manuscripts or book prospectuses, as I'm sure many of the colleagues here who are scholars have, I am still a reader for MIT Press and Oxford Press, Routledge, Wiley Blackwell, and others, as well as 48 journals. For reasons of reciprocity, I try to review for at least as many journals as I submit to, which does mean it's now up to a lot of journals. And I have the privilege of being highly cited for the past 6 years, along with a few other Sussex colleagues. So lots of experience in different ways of academia: author, grant proposer, reviewer, and editor, which also gets me to see behind the curtain a lot at maybe areas that only authors wouldn't see. That all said, I am, of course, speaking only in my personal capacity, not on behalf of the University of Sussex or Boston University or any of the journals and presses that I work with. All right, enough of that. Why do we care about rejection and failure? And what forms does it take? Now, I think many of you have probably suffered a failure to publish. And here I would say, raise your hand if you have had an article rejected. Everyone has raised their hand, right? So we all experience failure to publish. Excellent. I've never had someone in the audience not raise their hand. So at least it tells you it's a pretty relevant topic. However, you can also have something published and then fail to catch mistakes or fail to anticipate how people are going to react to it. I'm going to give you some amazing examples to that. You can also have a great paper that is never cited. And there is no correlation here. I even have, checked it this morning, a 6-volume book set with Routledge, 2,400 pages, 0 citations. Imagine the years of work that went into compiling that volume, yet no one has bothered to engage with it. There's also a failure to be funded. How many of you have had grant proposals rejected? Probably many of you. I've had one rejected this week. So I'll cover all 4 of these types of failure, and then I'll give you some tips for what I recommend you can actually do about it. So to begin with, there are many bad reviewers out there. Believe it or not, I see a bad review every day, and AI tools are making it even worse. We have seen ChatGPT reviews that are quite frankly garbage. And at Elsevier journals, which is the largest volume of publishing in the world, Springer Nature is number 2, Elsevier is number 1, the rejection rate is 82%. 82%. And that's everyone. That isn't students or early career researchers. That's Nobel laureates, lab directors, full professors, and brilliant luminaries. 82% is the average rejection rate. So 4 out of 5 times, by statistics, you should expect your manuscript to be rejected the first time around. And I have a long list of really good examples of bad reviews. I am on record, and I can share the review if you ever want to see it, a 1-word rejection. The word was no. And the editor upheld that rejection. There's also one example of an article we had on nuclear power talking about critical nuclear accidents where the review was 15,000 words, longer than the manuscript itself, because they got so frustrated and just began to attack and attack and attack. Another example of a reviewer who in the middle of their review said, going off to dinner, remember to come back to this. And they never did. They submitted a half-complete review, forgetting they never actually finished reading the manuscript. That review was also upheld. I have had profanity used. I've been called a Nazi, and people have dropped the F-bomb in peer reviews to me, especially on critical topics like geoengineering, carbon capture and storage, nuclear power. And you may be unsurprised to learn that our gender critique of the Asian Development Bank for being very patriarchal was rejected by 2 male reviewers who said there's no problem with patriarchy. Well, that's a pretty big conflict of interest when our article was critiquing the very reviewers who were in charge of assessing it. In each of these cases, we made appeals to the journals, and in each of those cases, we lost the appeals. And then it isn't just peer reviewers, there are also lots of really bad editors out there. Editors who forget to send it out for review, editors who forgot that it was actually submitted. This was especially the case, I'm going to date myself now, when you actually sent papers in by mail. You would print them out and mail 3 copies of the manuscript to the journal, and then the journal would mail out the copies. It's before email was really proliferated. So it was especially true then. But even now with online systems, editors are really overwhelmed. They're grappling with hundreds of articles a week, and they may not realize they have an article or reviews are in 2 really painful cases. We have had a manuscript that was submitted, peer-reviewed, revised in good faith, resubmitted, re-reviewed, revised a 3rd time, accepted by the reviewers. So it is now past peer review. Editor rejects. In one case, because they had a dinner conversation the night before about wind power, and our article was about the political economy of wind power, and they were convinced wind power would kill bats and birds, and so they rejected the article on ethical grounds. And in the other case, it was a new editor. The editor who was handling the article died, and this editor didn't think that 65 interviews was enough to meet the threshold for a representative article, so they rejected us on methodological grounds. We appealed in both of those cases, and our appeals were unsuccessful. And lastly, there have been other examples of editors gaming the system. There was a journal that no longer does this, but they used to have a standard desk reject unless you cited their journal 6 times, which was an attempt to get their impact factor up. It's also not a real good job in terms of editing. And if publishing wasn't hard enough, it's also very painful to find that you then make mistakes in what you publish. And I was doing this even 20 years ago. You can see here in this article on Danish wind energy, where we talked about Denmark having lowest energy consumption per capita in Europe. That was not true. It was lowest consumption per unit of economic growth per capita. So we were wrong, had to publish a short correction. This one was a little more serious. We made typos in tables, had some of the columns wrong. Thank goodness they didn't actually change the results significantly. This one happened here at University of Sussex, where the Smart Energy Lobby read our article and said, you're making mistakes. You've claimed, first of all, that energy costs aren't what you say, and you've also miscalculated externalities. I think in this case, we got billion confused with million. And here's another one with smart meters where we mistakenly said that you can't connect to them. You have to have a Wi-Fi connection. That is incorrect. Have to have a broadband connection, which is different. So again, small mistakes that you think, may not matter, but that others do pick up on. And that's why if you want to make yourself feel better, go to Google Scholar or Science Direct, put in core agendum, and you'll see millions of people making corrections to their articles. We get about one a week at the journal that I edit. And then most seriously, and this also happened here, Professor Andy Sterling and myself and Andrew Lawrence had to self-withdraw a manuscript because there was a table where poor Andrew Lawrence got the data mixed up and the results were gibberish. The results in the data table did not actually match the actual data. And that was a case where people detected it. And we actually, not only did we withdraw the article ourselves, we also referred ourselves to a research misconduct investigation just to be above board. Because, if you're withdrawing articles and retracting articles, there are all sorts of reasons. Many of the reasons are the plagiarism, fabrication, and fraud. I'm very pleased to say that the outcome of this investigation was that none of that happened here. It was just an honest mistake, but one that was so serious that we actually had to retract the article. And lastly, sometimes, you write a piece and you think that's it, and people get really ticked off about it. And so this is actually a colleague that I still greatly respect called James Hansen, who's very well known in the climate space. He's been arrested outside of coal plants and protests, where he, has a whole critique of an article we published in Environmental Science and Technology. And we also had another study where we took on the Department of Energy, and where we attacked their NEMS, National Energy Modeling Simulation, for being biased. The article was called Looking the Wrong Way, Bias in Energy Modeling in the United States. And of course, that really upset. This is the chief energy modeler at the Department of Energy demanding the article be retracted and also demanding that we both be fired. And I'm happy to say that the journal investigated and upheld our argument and also refused to publish their rebuttal. So then they published it online with this on inaccuracies in a published journal article by David Daniels and Chris Namovitz. Chris is the lead energy modeler for the EIA. So again, and then lastly, this one really hurt and also happened here at Sussex. I was the director of the Center on Innovation and Energy Demand, and UCL had a sister institute called the Center for Energy Epidemiology. We were one of 6 centers of excellence on energy demand. And I knew David and colleagues very well, visited them, gave a seminar to them, we'd referenced their work, and out of the blue, they didn't even let us know. They write to the journal about an article we published on smart meters, arguing it's rubbish, it should be withdrawn immediately. We also wrote a counter rebuttal, and I'm pleased to say the journal upheld publication. We met standards of peer review and all of that. And there was a brutal exchange where we actually have a response to this letter, which you can see online, which was painful. I mean, what was kind of ironic is they also made 11 mistakes in their letter. So we were going back and forth with counterclaims, and we even made a little, cheeky little, you would think that in an article about retraction, you'd pay more attention to data and not make silly mistakes. But yeah, look at this. Paper contains factual errors that material change the conclusions of the paper, is sufficiently unclear, and does not display issues of academic impartiality and balance. Fudge. And, boy, I guess I have a lot more examples than I remember. Here's a nice piece we published in Nature Energy with Andy Sterling and some other colleagues, where it provoked a debate. and they wrote a Matters Arising. We wrote a counter one. Happy to say that the journal did upheld it. And this is not true. Jesse Jenkins from Princeton saying that Matters Arising only occurs when there is flaws is not Matters Arising. Matters Arising are new issues emerge that deserve debate and discussion. So even their tweet is perpetuating falsely that our article was flawed. If it was flawed, the journal would have withdrawn it, which they did not. And we actually have a long rebuttal against Harris and Fell. They claim to replicate our study design, except they use different data, different countries, and different time periods. That's not replication. And then lastly, I just want to do this. This has some profanity, just to warn you. Totally catching me off guard about 2 years ago. This cartoon showed up on Twitter when it was still Twitter. I didn't make the cartoon. I have a personal Twitter account, and I reposted it because I thought it was kind of catchy. It was like, okay, yes, we have serious incidents with nuclear power exploding and the BP Deepwater Oil Horizon spill and serious issues with coal power. But then, of course, people have NIMBY attitudes about wind power. Okay. Boy, I was not prepared for the storm of thousands of responses that I got. How many rubles did I get paid to post it? Eat shit. Idiot, dude, why nuclear? Are you really an IPCC author? Except it's just a cartoon. And guess what, Helen? It got worse. You are a liar and should be stripped of all of your titles. What happens when the wind's not blowing? Profane word. You are dumb as shit. Dumb fuck juice. It's actually kind of scary how a non-scientist can bullshit his way into building a major author while peddling insane anti-science horseshit. It was a cartoon. It wasn't an academic article. I was just sharing. So there is probably a very egregious example of where I certainly did not anticipate this level of reaction to my post. And even though I've been on Twitter now for 10 years, this is now the most action I've ever gotten. Not out of any of my research or any of my mentoring or any of my blogs or online discussions. It's this cartoon which generated thousands and thousands of shares and retweets. Moving on, there's also a failure to be cited. Look at this. Half of academic papers are never read by anyone other than their authors, the journal editor, or the peer reviewers. This is also very frustrating that getting your work cited, you would think, I often thought it was like a fish, and you release the fish into the sea and the fish will end up going where it needs to go. That's not the case. Sometimes promoting your work, as hard as it is to design a research study, write the study, submit it to peer review, revise it, submit it again, revise it, proof it, and publish it. As much work as that is, like a year's worth of work, getting your research used is just as much work. It could also take you a year's worth of effort to get that study into the hands of those policymakers, colleagues, and scholars who want to use it. And I do have a huge fat tail of uncited works, 75 of my beautiful books and outputs, including that 6-volume set, which is here somewhere. Yeah, Energy Security, 6-volume set, 2,388 words. 10 years ago, not one citation. In fact, I didn't even cite it myself, which is kind of funny. And there's no correlation to rigor or quality here. That troubled waters piece used very sophisticated modeling with the Center of Naval Analysis to look at energy water areas. We have a really nice case study of Sri Lanka there, where we did intensive field research in urban and rural Colombo for 6 months. We have another one on Papua New Guinea and China, none of which got any citations. Some of these papers took a year, right, to actually just collect the data. And we also have a huge long array of grant proposals that have been rejected. I have been a principal investigator, co-investigator, research fellow, or collaborator on more than 250 grant proposals. So it's about 12 a year or 1 a month. And my success rate is exactly 20.8%. Gosh, eerily close to that 80% rejection rate for journals. That is still higher than the average here for, say, the Economic and Social Research Council. I think the average there is about 15%, but far lower than the averages at Spru or Boston. So I'm actually not doing as well as my colleagues. The average Sussex person does better. Good for them. It just so happens that I'm probably doing a higher volume of proposals. And again, you can get rejected for your grants for all sorts of reasons. Painful ones include, in 3 cases, we have had perfect reviewer scores, which is unheard of. 7 out of 7 or excellent, excellent, excellent. We're not funded by the research councils. And we know for a fact they funded other proposals that did not have as high reviewer scores. And to be fair, there could be other criteria there. Geographic diversity, maybe there was another Sussex one or too many from England, or gender, maybe there were too many male PIs and so forth. So I'm not faulting the research councils, but it hurts. It's like, what more can you do than get a perfect score? I also know colleagues for Horizon Europe proposals, it's a 15 points a scale that got a 15 and still didn't get it. Because maybe there were 4 that got 15s and they could only fund 2. So again, sometimes there's nothing you can do. This also hurt. Also happening now with the US government. This actually happened 30 years ago. We won a 35 million US EPA grant that was then taken out due to budget cuts. And right now in the United States, my department has a USAID grant, which has also been cut and scrapped because of the Trump administration's decisions. Oops. And lastly, and this was at Sussex here, wonderful proposal at ESRC, which is the Economic and Social Research Council. A reviewer gave us a 0 score out of 7 because talking to people via a so-called research interview is not a method. Yes, it is. It is a core method in geography, sociology, political science, etc. This is an extremely biased review, but of course it was upheld. And that 0 sabotaged the entire proposal so that we were knocked out of the running. So prepare for rejection and criticism. Look at this. This is Elinor Ostrom, the first woman to win the Nobel Prize for Economics. She learned not to take rejection as being permanent. When she applied for a PhD, she was rejected. And she ends up winning, first woman to win a PhD in economics. And she even said, for more innovative papers, expect rejection. One of the papers in her Nobel citation was rejected 5 times. She had to try 6 times. That is also true for my most highly cited, solely authored paper. It was rejected 5 times. It was the 6th time, not the 3rd time or the 4th time. And Ben Martin, Professor Ben Martin is here at Sussex. He is senior editor at Research Policy, which is an amazing journal. He went back and did a kind of content analysis of their top 50 articles of all time, like most highly cited, impactful articles they've published at the journal, and found, so those articles are by definition the best the journal has done. Ben found in almost every example, there was a peer reviewer suggesting reject up until the end, that they had to overrule. So it really does suggest transformative papers sometimes fail peer review. Which is why I really do believe writing papers and proposals is a numbers game. And if the success rate is 20%, I've got to submit 5 to hopefully win 1. I have also had some of my worst papers accepted and some really good papers rejected and flipped them. I've also taken the same article and submitted it to another journal as is. I wouldn't recommend this. This is ethically questionable because you're kind of ignoring peer review. But in this particular case, I got married. I was going on my honeymoon. The rejects came in a day before my honeymoon. I was gone for 90 days. Why not, Helen, right? Take it, just flip it back to another journal and I'll deal with it when I come back. Nothing lost. Was amazed it was accepted when I came back from my vacation. So there's a great example, the same piece of research, kind of like an accidental experiment. One journal, 3 reviewers reject. Another journal, 3 other reviewers accept. The paper was the same. And this now leads me to talk about why failure and rejection is everywhere. Look at this. Michael Jordan missed more than 9,000 shots, lost 300 games, 26 times he took the winning shot and missed, which is obviously not how we know Michael Jordan. Or a little example here, closer to home, Sir Winston Churchill, success is something from failure to failure with no loss in enthusiasm. Or one of my people that I admire, Abraham Lincoln, who failed for local council, failed to become mayor, failed to become senator, failed to become House representative. He failed and failed and failed and failed until he finally succeeded. And to choose a few other examples, we see Albert Einstein did not speak until he was 4 years old, and people thought he was subnormal. He was expelled from school and called mentally slow. Bill Gates dropped out of Harvard, and his first business, Trough O Data, was a failure. Thomas Edison's teachers said he was too stupid to learn anything. I believe that is Stephen King at 30 years old. No, that was Steve Jobs. He was depressed and was removed from his first company. Oprah Winfrey was told she was unfit for TV. The Beatles were told they had no future in show business. Marilyn Monroe was dropped by 20th Century Fox. Charlie Chaplin was said to have no imagination. Henry Ford failed at 3 businesses before he started the Ford Motor Company at 53. One of my favorite, because I love KFC, Colonel Sanders couldn't sell his chicken to more than 1,000 restaurants before he started up KFC. Stephen King's first book was rejected 30 times. Honda was passed over for an engineering job at Toyota before he started Honda Motors Company. And then a final example, very close, Rowling and Harry Potter, right, was rejected by 12 publishers. So as you can see, these are not isolated examples. Some of the best leaders and most successful people we have all failed or been told they're no good. So moving to tips, really try to prepare for rejection and criticism. Publishing does get easier the better you do it. So does writing proposals, right? It's like building a muscle or training for a marathon or learning to play the piano. And I like Gladwell's 10,000 hour rule, which says that if you take any activity and invest 10,000 hours or 10 years, you'll become an expert at it. And this is true for me. First article I wrote, my PhD, took me a year. Second article I wrote, 9 months. Third article, 6 months. Now, if I've got 2 weeks and no distractions, I can probably write a manuscript from start to finish. So I've kind of learned to really hone and train my muscle. Academia is also a really weird place of people are only taking shots at me on Twitter, and chief modelers from the Department of Energy are only attacking us because we're worth engaging with. And so it's a really weird one of like, they only critique you because you matter, right? Almost like the whole, there is no such thing as bad news. There's no such thing as bad attention, even if it's criticism. And I do, Anna Karina talks about how all successes are very common, but every failure is unique. And you can have a whole ladder, a hierarchy, a nested hierarchy of how rejections happen. Bad editors, right editors, but bad reviewers, or bad screens, or then raw, research council decisions, overriding reviews and all that. So you have to have the stars align to have something be successful, but any one of them can cause something to fail. And I was looking this up. If you count everything I've written, I have now been rejected more than 2,000 times. Even worse than Rowling, even worse than KFC, who went to all those restaurants. So some tips: rework unsuccessful bids and papers. Even ESRC has acknowledged this. Researchers which apply infrequently have lower success than those who are more active. The rhythm and tempo can be soul crushing. So I'll give you another example. My worst streak was actually here at Sussex, where Helen, for a year and a half, I didn't win a grant. I went 0 for 21, 21 proposals rejected. ERCs, ESRCs, UKRI, Nordic Research Council, reject, 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 reject. Only to then go on a streak of 10 for 11 and round it out the other way, including many of those same proposals that were on the 3rd or 4th try, as well as the 2 largest grants I've ever won as PI or co-PI, one for 10 million, one for $40 million. So imagine if I had given up here, these never would have happened. And successful grant holders often have rejections for bids that will be funded elsewhere, even with the same funder. And that is true. And grit pays off. That is true, though, for one of my favorite projects, which I was just presenting last week, called Genie, which was an ERC synergy grant. So this is a prestigious European Research Council grant. It's the longest, 6 years, and the most money, 10 million euros they give. This is the biggest you can get. 5 rejections before it was funded. ERC rejected it 2 times. So this really goes to show even the same funder, eventually you'll wear them down, or eventually you improve the proposal so that it is funded. But again, if I'd given up after the second try or the third try, and it was infuriating. Try number 2 was for the ESRC here in the UK. ESRC refused to let it go to peer review and said, it's too physical and natural sciences, try EPSRC. So I submitted it to EPSRC, and you know what they said? It's too social sciencey, send it to ESRC. We wrote to both research councils and said, you claim on this webpage that you like interdisciplinary work that brings together the social sciences and the physical sciences. They ignored that email. Preparing for rejection, having grit and a thick skin helps, and then so do mentors. I have been blessed with 3 amazing mentors, and you can see them here. That is a very young Benjamin Sovacool at Virginia Tech with my PhD advisor, Richard Hirsch. Back when I had a goatee, they were in style. Bottom left is who I got my master's degree with. That is George Ziegelmuller, who really helped me, not just as a scholar, but also as a person. He was a kind, sweet man who would garden and volunteer. And then this is my undergrad mentor, Brent Brosman. That's me, by the way. Yes, I see jaws dropping. And Brett is still a mentor at John Carroll University, which is a small Jesuit school. I would not be where I am now without Brent, George, and Richard. This means 2 things. It means find a mentor. It also means be a mentor and try to play it forward. You can also change the system from within. You don't like quality of peer review? Be a reviewer. Be the reviewer that you want to see. I find myself now, I peer review 20 or 30 times a year. I really don't try to reject. Even papers that need a lot of love or improvement, I am really sparing with that reject, right? So you can be a supportive, nurturing, caring reviewer. Or here's a tip, for every criticism you have, give a compliment. So rather than just say, here are the 12 things wrong with your crappy article, say, well, here are the 10 things I like, and here are the 10 things that need improvement. Find opportunities to also become editors. Most journals are always looking for members of their editorial board, although the gateway is often being a peer reviewer. If you peer review for a journal 4 or 5 times, you get to know the editors, they get to know you, you do good quality reviews. My journal even gives best reviewer certificates. So if you get a certificate from us, that's a nice gateway we've used to actually find people to join our board. And then lastly, and this is always true, review grant proposals or be on grant panels. This is a whole other way of learning and networking. You get to see proposals, so you get to kind of see what are you competing with. You also get to see how other evaluators assess proposals. And they're all over the place. I once saw someone reject a proposal because of their color scheme, because they said that those colors weren't sensitive to those with color blindness. Reject. Who would have thought that even the colors you use in some of your diagrams really matter? So I think this is at least a way that you can start to serve, pending it doesn't interrupt with your classes or other tasks of becoming a reviewer, an editor, or a proposal reviewer. So really and truly try to flip your mental attitude. This is not a healthy space for people who can't take rejection and criticism. I get criticism every week. I get rejected almost every other day. That way you'll be really surprised and pleased that you made it through, rather than perpetually disappointed and depressed that you got rejected. Do become the sort of critic you want to see in the world. People often ask me, why am I moderately successful in academia? And the answer that people may want to think about is my training, or I had good mentors, which did play a role, or I am intelligent, etc. When in reality, I think just persevering and not letting it get to you, which is not something you can necessarily teach. And I also think that kind of sharing experiences, destigmatizing and mystifying rejection, and humor helps. I fully recommend a rejection night where maybe once a month, get together with other students or colleagues, have a pint, and talk about your rejections. And don't be afraid to laugh. This is what happens when you incorporate all of the feedback from every critique. Actually, it still kind of looks delicious to the American in me. I like those potential chocolate sprinkles. Here's another one that still makes me laugh. Most scientists regard the new streamlined peer review process as quite an improvement. Note the masochist. I think actually death is there too at the end before paper gets accepted. This one I thought I would throw in because most of us have been there. It says here you should go to hell, but since you already have a PhD, we'll count that as time served. Again, I'm not endorsing these cartoons. I'm just showing them so get a laugh and kind of, lighten the mood a bit. That said, don't isolate yourself from learning and being curious or stupid. I really like this piece by Martin, that academic and scientific research is a place where you should be able to make mistakes. And asking stupid questions, being stupid or untrained is actually a really important part of the learning process. Make sure to give yourself time to think. This is a very recent article in Nature from last year, which is even talking about how we spend too much time emailing, too much time administrating, travel expenses, Unit 4 and all of that. We don't spend enough time to think. And I really, really like Albert Einstein, who said many brilliant things, but one of the ones I like, if we knew what we were looking for, it wouldn't be called research. And then lastly, Yoda, big Star Wars fan, who did say, difference between a master and a beginner is the master has failed more times than the beginner has even tried. Thank you.